Are you drowning in money questions but too embarrassed to ask? Tired of scrolling endlessly through conflicting financial advice that leaves you more confused than when you started? Welcome to the Finance Girlies podcast, your cozy corner for all things finance. I'm your host, Emily.
And I'm your host, Cassidy. We're both finance writers for brands like Forbes Advisor, USA Today Blueprint, and Yahoo Finance. Throughout our careers and personal lives, we have come to one realization. When we keep our money worries to ourselves, we end up feeling alone. That's why each episode we tackle those burning questions you've been afraid to ask with no judgment, no jargon, just real talk about real money. Ready to finally get answers? Let's dive in. Hey girlies, today's episode is for anyone who's ever opened their bank account app and instantly wanted to throw it into the lake. If you've ever felt behind, even when you're technically doing okay, or spiraled after comparing yourself to someone online, or wondered why you still feel anxious about money no matter how many spreadsheets you make, this episode is for you.
Today we're talking about something called money dysmorphia, which is the disconnect between how we feel about our finances and what's actually true. And to help us unpack it, we're joined by someone who's been thinking about this topic and working with people to change their financial narratives for over 20 years.
Julie Guntrip is the head of financial wellness and content strategy at Jenius Bank, where she helps make money feel less overwhelming and more empowering. She's worked in marketing and finance for over 20 years, including teaching personal finance as a business school professor, and she brings a thoughtful, practical approach to helping people reduce financial anxiety, align spending with their values, and feel more in control of their money. So, Julie, we are so excited to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Our pleasure. So I want to start in reference to a LinkedIn post you made recently. You said that financial independence isn't just a destination. It's made up of everyday decisions that move us closer to feeling in control. So can you tell us a little bit about your own journey to feeling financially independent and then some of those small but meaningful moments along the way?
Sure. I remember that post, actually. I think it was related to the 4th of July and kind of declaring your financial independence. And I sort of cued in on the declaration of that. And so I think the example I gave in that post is one that is pretty meaningful to me in my life, that kind of that initial moment. And it was when I was 22, I was graduating from college and I really wanted to go to grad school. I wanted to go to grad school because I didn't want to get a job, but I wanted to go to grad school and I really wanted to make my own decisions about where and what I studied and all those things. And I was so fortunate that my parents had supported me through college, which not everyone has that. So absolutely appreciated that. But I didn't want to ask them to support me through grad school. And I also really was ready to make my own decisions. And as we know, like a lot of times, in order to make your own decisions, you have to be able to fund your own decisions. And so for me, that was the moment where I said, I'm going to grad school, here's where I'm going, and I'm paying for it myself, and I'm living on my own and doing all that. And as a Gen Xer, that might not be something totally foreign to other Gen Xers, but I feel like even now, like that's a really hard thing to do. I think millennials and Gen Zs found that, to be much harder. And in that moment, it was definitely defining for me because I had to figure it all out and figure out how to pay bills and figure out how to do all the things. And I was particularly proud of myself for doing that. And I felt like that gave me the confidence that I knew that I could truly adult, And so I think that's my defining moment. But then subsequently in life, there's 1,000 little moments that happen, right? You get that first job or you open that first, high yield savings account, or you actually earn interest or earn money and you see how that works. Or, gosh, I remember getting life insurance for the first time that I felt like an adult with that for sure. But I think a little later in life, after I was married and had kids, one financial decision that we made as a couple, my husband and I think was really pivotal. And, we had kind of gotten caught up in the excitement of, wow, our house, we're living in Southern California, so this might be like a California thing, right? But our house was worth more money. Like we could sell it and get a bigger house. And oh my gosh, we would be so fancy. My best friend's like, oh my gosh, that house has beautiful big wood doors and da da da. And if there had been social media at the time, because was a little bit before social media, I definitely would have been posting about getting a big fancy house and all of that. And we definitely got caught up in it. And we bought a house and was really pretty and really nice and really big. And we were house poor. And, you know, it was a little painful, and fortunately for us, we had enough in the house, and we were able to pay our bills, and so we weren't the story that a lot of people were in, like, 2008 and, those the years that followed in the recession, but it kind of everything became like, "We can't do this because of we owe all this money on the house," or,
Mm.
the choices we made, and we ended up waiting it out a little bit and selling the house and downsizing dramatically. And with that, we were able to live our lives more aligned with our values. And one of the things we valued tremendously, and we still value tremendously, are like life experiences and traveling. And that's something
Mm.
we met. He and I met while traveling. And we wanted our children, who were becoming, older, obviously at that time, to have those types of experiences. And we wanted to be able to make choices based on what their needs were too, not based on, "Oh my gosh, we feel so poor because of the house." And I mean, that changed everything for us because we were able to live so differently after that. And so I would say there are 1,000 little moments as you referred to, but sometimes in life there are those big ones that stand out that kind of look back and point to as like, wow, that really made a difference in where I am now. And in I'm not financially independent. I'm still working, so I'm not completely financially independent, but I feel like I'm a lot more independent now because I made choices like that along the way.
Mm,
Yeah, financial independence isn't this like light switch, like you suddenly flip it on and you're there. It's this progression, like this milestone you're working toward and also like have achieved to some degree, even as you continue to still work on it. And that becomes evident just in like the amount of worry or like money stress that you don't have now compared to, maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So there are like all of these little milestones that you hit along the way.
Agree, agree.
Yeah. Okay. One of your big focus areas is money dysmorphia.
Mhm.
I had never heard of this term before. I am a little obsessed with this term because I feel like it just kind of bundles up into two words, like this whole thing that we experience but don't really know what to call. So for folks who haven't heard of this term before, what is it and how does it show up in real life for a lot of people?
Right. So money dysmorphia at its broadest, like 50,000-foot level is when like your perception of your financial situation doesn't match the reality. Now, I think of this, I mean, there's been a fair amount written about it, right? So you're going to get my take, but I've seen it written as like a spectrum. So, and I think of it as like a spectrum. So one end of the spectrum, this disconnect is occurring between like you're actually pretty okay, but you're constantly stressed about your money. The other end of the spectrum is like you're not okay and you're spending out of control, right?
Hmm.
So I wrote in an article on this topic. I wrote about kind of the first example where you're at the end of the spectrum where you might actually be in a pretty good financial situation, or you're in a practical place with your finances. Maybe you're not,
Hmm.
like killing it completely, but you're in a good place with your money, but you're constantly stressed about your money. And when I wrote the article, we did some other research, and I saw a quote, something from Bloomberg, where it was said 41% of millennials suffer from financial dysmorphia. So
Hmm.
that's a decently sized number, but what I thought was even more interesting for me and what caused me to really dig into it is I saw correlations. I don't mean that in a mathematical term, but
Hmm.
complement with our mind money connection research that we did at Genius Bank. So we talked to over 4,000 individuals across a broad age spectrum about the connection between their money and their mental health. And when I did a lot of analysis on this research, so when I isolated from millennials, I saw this phenomena that's like was money dysmorphia before I had actually read the article that was money dysmorphia. So
Hmm.
I would love to like just quote a little bit about from our research and nerd out on those numbers for a second and why I kind of saw a glimmer of this and it became so interested and then subsequently read like, oh, this is actually a thing out in the marketplace. But so when I was doing this analysis, so 53.8, so we'll call it like, almost 54% of millennials think that their generation has more anxiety than other generations. In addition, about 58% of millennials in our study said that their finances were making them stressed, and they could define stress as like causing them anxiety or feelings of depression. And that was like about 10% higher than like non millennials. But in other parts of the survey, when you asked the same group of millennials, like, how do you feel about your emergency fund? Like 52% reported feeling confident about the emergency fund. And when you ask them, do you feel like you're on track for retirement? 45.6% said that they were on track for retirement. And almost 37% of them said that they were in a better place than they had planned in their life. And about 30% of them said they were on track for where they thought they should be in their lives. So I looked at that when I was doing this analysis and I was like, wow, millennials are conflicted. And I like this is a dichotomy, if you want to use a big word. Like they're saying they're stressed, but they actually then when you look at the balances, a lot of them are saying they're okay. And so where is that coming from? And my hypothesis on that is that millennials are just at a constant state of anxiety, simmer state, I called it, where, when you're raised and you're coming out of college during a recession and you're, gosh, living through a pandemic and then inflation and all the things that millennials have gone through in their lifetime. I suppose maybe you're always in a state of fight or flight about your money, even if the reality is, not that bad. And so that to me is a perfect example of money dysmorphia.
As a millennial, like, this all rings very true.
I
I
was literally about to say the same exact thing.
okay.
Like, verbatim.
Well, I told you, Cassidy, like, within the last month, my husband and I sat down to do, like, kind of a big look into our finances. Like, we talk about money on the regular, but, like, we were really getting into the numbers. And before we sat down, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna like what I see. Like, things just feel a little off. Maybe we're not, like, quite as on track as we wanna be. And when we sat down and looked at the numbers, I was pleasantly surprised. And so I feel like that is the perfect illustration of what you're talking about. Similarly, when are talking about, like, the constant state of anxiety, my first job out of college, I was making, like, less than 30K a year. I wouldn't say I was super stressed about money because I had so few financial obligations, but that job petered out when the pandemic hit, and just, like, rebuilding a career at age 25 during that time, it was really, really hard, and so I do feel like I've internalized some of that anxiety from, like, coming of age
Yeah,
during that time.
definitely. Yes.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same? I feel like we're in a therapy session
Um,
right now.
yeah. I know, I
I
wanna hear.
know. I'm like, here's my experience. Yeah, whenever you were talking about the spectrum earlier, you talked about on the other side of it are people who like think that they're doing
Mhm.
okay when really they're not. And that is what I'm afraid of. Like I feel like I have been all over that range where early I went through like this really frugal stage in my 20s where I was like not allowing myself to spend money on anything in the name of saving as much money as possible. And so I didn't come out and say, like, I'm doing fire, like, I want to retire early, but that was what it was. And it wasn't until I was like, what if I am not able to see retirement, even if I want to retire, like, in my 30s or 40s? I think I need to stamp off the brakes a little bit and allow myself to enjoy life a little bit more now. And even though I've, like, looked at the math and I know Even if I don't save another penny in my retirement accounts, this is what my balance will be at traditional retirement age, even though I know all of that math. And I'm trying to use that math to allow myself to like spend a little more freely. In the back of my head, I'm still like, what if I'm allowing myself to spend more freely and really I'm not doing as financially
Mhm.
okay as I think that I
Yeah.
am?
Yeah.
So,
It's being caught
yeah.
without a plan. And I suppose that also, you know, feeds into a personality type. I mean, I definitely can relate to that. So potentially if we took personality tests, we would align on some factors, planners and that. But no, I agree. I think
Mhm.
there's something there with what the generation has been feeling. Although, I'm a Gen Xer, I still feel it. And I think for me, that comes more from having a dad who was raised in the Depression and always having these messages about
Mm.
scarcity. And, my parents were teachers. And so growing up, they made a good living, but it wasn't always money for a lot of the extras. And they owned a business. And so I was always reminded of having all the work that it took to make every dollar. So that's
Mhm.
my own, like, I think we're very influenced by how we're raised as
Mm,
well too.
definitely. Yeah. You kind of touched on this in your intro, but we do want to touch on like
Mhm.
the comparison culture that is, I think, more prevalent
Mhm.
among millennials and Gen Z,
Mhm.
especially online. So, how is social media like warping the way we see our financial health? What are some subtle signs, or maybe not so subtle signs, that someone is struggling with money
Well, I'll start with the
dysmorphia?
first part of that question in that, if we're just looking at that, again, going on that spectrum, if we're looking on the end of the spectrum where people are, maybe doing all right, but still stressed. I think the messaging from social media and watching everyone everyone else. Okay, here, if you can't see me, but I've got my little like quotes in there. Everyone else doing things that you don't feel like you can afford. And it's this constant question of how can they do that? And I don't feel like I can. And so we feel bad about ourselves and where we are in our lives because, we don't feel like we can live this sort of, I'll say, highlight reel that someone else has posted of their own lives. And so, for sure, I believe, and I talk about this in a lot of things because I run social media for the bank. And so, people are always asking me about social media and the influences, especially when it relates to money. And we do have to remember that, everyone's making their own choices and you are seeing the highlight reel doesn't always really reflect what's going on with someone's lives and they're not making the same types of choices that you are and maybe they're not looking at their bank accounts when they're making them and perhaps they're living at the other end of the spectrum of that money dysmorphia spectrum we just talked about.
Ever finish a podcast episode and wish you had the links, tools, or hot takes all in one spot?
Same. That's why we made our newsletter. It's where we share the extra gems we don't always have time for in the episodes.
From money tips to life updates, it's the perfect little companion to the pod.
Subscribe to the Finance Girlies on Substack. Links in the show notes.
What are some signs that someone might be struggling with money dysmorphia?
I think it's most likely self-reported, right? Because it's how you feel
Mm.
about your money. I mean, we just talked about the anxiety. Um, I think, in our article, in my article, people, some like hoarding behaviors or we that they don't have enough or, the constant comparison or checking your bank accounts multiple times a day, which is actually in our research that we did, millennials are likely to check their financial situation daily. In fact, it's like
Huh.
over 50%. But I think it's self-reported. It's how you feel. Do you have you have that peace of mind? Do you, of course, the suffering from any type of mental health, situation, you would want people to seek help and for that. I mean, for sure. And I'm not like a licensed therapist or psychologist. I think it's how you feel. So I think it's like self-diagnosed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I was going to say, going back to what you said just a few minutes ago about seeing everyone's post on social media and seeing the highlight reel and thinking like, how can they afford this? How can they afford that? It reminded me, have you read the book Psychology of Money
Yeah.
by Morgan Housel? Okay.
Yeah.
I have some of the quotes from that book in my notes app because I was like jotting down all the little nuggets as I was reading it. And it reminded me of one quote where he says, spending money to show people how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money, and wealth is what you don't see. And so I know, especially when I was going through my like really, really frugal era where I was like
Mhm.
not allowing myself to spend money on anything, anytime I would see people, this is something I had to work through. This is not a healthy mindset, but anytime I would see people on social media spending money on like really cool vacations or like brand new wardrobes and all of this stuff, I would be like, they are not like, they don't have any wealth. They are probably spending all of their money and they might not be financially secure. And that did help me in some ways, like, not feel as jealous because I was like, what you're working on is equally important in another way. And then,
Mhm.
like I said, over time, I did move and strike a balance where I'm like, no, similar to you, Julie, like, I value life experiences. Like, I
Mhm.
don't want to get to the end of my life and be like, I have this financial security, but I've literally done nothing to bring me joy because I've like robbed myself of everything in the process of saving. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, but it did remind me of that quote.
And I would say getting aligned with your money values, like with my story about life experiences, and you feel the same. And I think people think that sounds really complicated or really hard, but it's truly like, what do you want out of life? Because we talk about at Genius Bank, we say this a lot, and your money goals are your life goals. I'm gonna put that way.
Mhm.
Your money goals are your life goals. So it should start with what you want in your life. And then your money should align with that. So there are decisions about your money. And I love talking about intentional spending because I feel like telling people they can't spend it all, that's not a message that most people want to receive,
Mhm.
but it's spending intentionally, like, in my house example, or you're going on vacation and you want to go to a really nice restaurant. Well, then don't order takeout, the couple weeks before so you can save up to have really nice meals when you're on vacation. Like, that's a super simplistic example, but one that if you kind of get yourself in the mindset of, I'm going to spend money, but I'm going to spend it on the things that are most important to me, and not the things that are going to look fancy on my Instagram or impress my friends, because ultimately then I'm funneling my money into the things that they value, not the things that I value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have so many thoughts, but I'll just choose one. I was thinking, Cassie, when you were talking, I have a theory, like this like tug of war that we like constantly experience with like the no, I need to save more. No, I need to live my life. No, I need to save more. I wonder if any of that has to do with like the models our parents' generations have illustrated, where like you work the same job for 30, 40 years, and then you retire and you travel and you do all those fun things. And like
Mhm.
veering away from that, because so many of us younger generations, like everyone's talking about like, we just spoke with Jillian Johnsrud a couple weeks ago about like mini retirements. People want to experience life while they're young, but it feels so wrong in a way to, like, veer off that example that maybe our parents have set. I think at least for me, that might be part of it, but
Yeah, I totally relate to that. My family was all like, if you were to ask my dad right now, like, when are you going to retire? He'd be like, I'm never going to retire. I'm going to work till the day I die. And so, yeah, I think that mindset, even if you roll your eyes at it, it still wiggles its way into your brain.
Oh,
And then to deviate away from it, you're like,
I talked to my dad about my dad is in his 90s. He's amazing and he golfs all the time still. In fact, he's golfing today. But, he doesn't understand, the culture has changed dramatically. Even when I talk to him about, working remotely. I mean, I'm a fully remote employee, like that blows his mind and things like that. So I think, like, culturally we've gone to different places, but it's hard to rewire the way we're raised.
Mhm.
And in some ways, I guess that's why you both are successful and you have a finance podcast. So you wouldn't want to completely rewire that. But it is something that we're raised with. I think, family of origin or cultural background and all of that plays a big factor in how we view financial wellness and how we prioritize how we spend money.
You have also talked about inflation fatigue. Can you break down for us what that is and how you see it impacting the way people think about money, especially in 2025?
I love all these made up terms. Aren't they cool? Like they're just we just make up our own language. But inflation fatigue is I mean, we've been talking about inflation for a really long time.
Mhm.
And so I think at the most basic level, I've seen lots of interpretations of inflation fatigue like online and different writers. So we can talk about a few of them. But at the most basic level, inflation fatigue is when people are really tired of talking about inflation. They're probably even more tired of experiencing it. But I mean, some of it is we've talked about it, maybe even this might be a quasi political statement. I don't know, but we talked about it almost more than we've experienced it. I mean, we can all
Mhm.
talk about the price of eggs and gas and all those things, but you know, some of it is the threat of future inflation or the are we in inflation? Are we not in inflation? And so there's definitely the mental and emotional exhaustion of just talking about it. And I was just listening to like a economics podcast the other day, and they were saying that people are just like, I'm just done listening to the inflation numbers. And, someone called it like vibe-based budgeting, which is another like awesome made a term, I love it, but the idea that, well, there's 2 different ideas. There's first one that you're just sick of it, and so you just like, "Whatever, I'm not even going to consider inflation when I'm thinking about my money anymore." Or the vibes-based one apparently is where you just go based on how you feel, not really how the numbers are. So and
Mhm.
that goes back to that anxiety, right? If we already have this raised level of anxiety, then we're just listening to that. We're not even listening to the numbers anymore because we feel like the numbers are all over the place. So it's just go with our vibe. Yeah, I'm not an economist. I don't have those letters like after my name, but I am also suffering from a little bit of inflation fatigue myself.
Mhm.
And I think that the cure or whatever for and I like we'll do those little air quotes again. The cure for inflation fatigue is truly just getting back to your own numbers. So, like as you were referring to earlier, Emily, you were talking about how you sat down and you were looking at your own accounts, right? And I think just really getting in touch with your own money. So we talk about like just tracking your finances, and we talk about that a lot and what we write and when I talk to media or whatever. That looking at the money you have coming in and the money that's going out, understanding how you spend and what your patterns are, and categorizing it and looking for opportunities to maybe, apply that sort of intentionality of like, do I really want to be spending over here? Because I know I want to be spending over here. And
Mhm.
just getting in touch with your money. So if you're faced with a situation where you do have to cut back, you're already really familiar with what is going on with you. And also you've put a little bit of prioritization against it. So if I had to cut, I could cut over here, but I'm not going to cut over there. I think that's like what everyone needs to do. And then again, like kind of having that values check of what's important to me. Like, all right, so I don't want to give up life experiences, but maybe I will move to a different neighborhood, or maybe I will drive my old car a little longer, or maybe I will do those things because that's less important to me than the things that are truly the non-negotiables that I want in my life. I wish I had a magic wand that I could get rid of everyone's like, inflation fatigue, or if I could get rid of inflation in general as a topic. But I think that's how we have to deal with it is we just have to center ourselves on, where we are and what we have going on and I mean, maybe a little bit of a plan B. What's our like our escape plan or whatever. And then the other thing I preach all the time, and it's not a new preach, but I'll just do it, is emergency funds. Like just build yourself an emergency fund. And again, people are like, from what money? It's like I understand that, but to the extent that you can have a little bit of money set aside, that could start to help with the anxiety too, because you don't feel like everything's hinged on like my bonus isn't exactly how it is, or like XYZ is more expensive than I thought it was going to be. And now that's sort of my last straw.
I also think for emergency funds in particular, if you don't have one yet, it's easy to be like, well, if I can't save the 3 to 6 months that literally everything online recommends, and like I shouldn't try at all. And part of that logic makes sense because it seems like this unreachable goal, but also like literally just having $200 compared to nothing will do something for your mental health.
I completely agree. And I am a big proponent of like momentum. Like,
Mm.
I think the key sometimes it's so easy to feel overwhelmed, and I am equally as human as everybody else, so I get overwhelmed too, but it's not going to happen unless you get started. And creating the momentum does get you started, but it also starts to build a little bit of confidence because you can kind of point to like, all right, I have the $200. Like, can I do a little bit more? And it's interesting, even just setting that as a goal for yourself. Like, we did a different survey than the one I referred to. We love to do research, and it was about financial goal setting. I do it every year. My team does. And I did a reel on it on Instagram. I can't quote the exact numbers, but I found that people who had set goals in 2024 felt more positively about their money in 2025, like by a really large margin. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like double digit percentages. And so it's just that idea of like taking those steps and taking that action can potentially help you just feel better about your situation.
I totally believe that because when I am feeling like a little bit unsure about where my finances stand, I find that like centering myself on like a single goal or even a couple of smaller goals grounds me a little bit, even if it doesn't change anything about where my money is, but just having that like point of focus, I guess,
Mhm.
makes me instantly feel better.
Oh my gosh. I have to just go on a tangent. Like one of my
Yeah.
favorite women on TikTok, or one of my favorite like content creators on TikTok. I was like gonna do her such a disservice because I can't even think of her name, but I have her face. Like I've pictured and I've recommended her to so many people. My husband and I always laugh. We're like, did you see her? She does that. How long does it actually take? Have you ever seen her? Oh my gosh, where she's like, how long does it actually take to clean out this closet that I've been procrastinating for a year and a half? And then she films herself like cleaning out the closet. And she's like, it took me 30 minutes to clean out the closet that I've been procrastinating for a year and a half. Like, join me for the next episode of how long does it actually take? And so it's a little bit like that, Emily. Like, we
Mm,
think it's going to be so much harder. And so we don't do it. And then when we
mhm.
actually do it, and I mean, this isn't like a human psychology podcast necessarily, it's a money podcast, but it's like we're all human with our money. And
Yeah.
it's like, so I love her. Anyway, that's just a little aside.
It's Christine Uretson.
Yes, she's
Yeah.
awesome.
Julie, in your work, how do you help people reset their internal money narrative, especially if they've spent years or decades thinking they're bad with money?
We're our own worst critics, aren't we? As we
Mhm.
Mhm.
talked about, like millennials and having those bad feelings. As an educator, I think it's important to start with educating yourself. I think that we become, to use this word again, a little bit overwhelmed with things that we don't understand. So we think we're bad with money because we don't necessarily have the tools and the knowledge to apply to situations. So I would say, and I have said in the past, step one is really focus on educating yourself. So you hear a term you don't understand, look it up. And I mean, we don't need to rely on Chat GPT for everything. I would say you could do your Google search, get your Google AI, maybe go down to the first, second, third, whatever returns, and go to a reputable source. You can go to Genius Bank if you want. And we have blogs full of all sorts of topics. But read about something, understand. So someone's talking about, oh, I'm earning interest. I mean, my daughters are Gen Zs. And so my one daughter, like, literally didn't believe me the first time I told her about compound interest, and she's like, "That can't be true. You can't just make money just because you put it in account. That's a scam." I'm like, "N no, actually, It's one of the few things that isn't a scam. So let's talk about it. But I think getting yourself educated is step 1 so that you can participate in the conversations. And and then I would say step 2, don't try to overwhelm yourself with, gosh, I've used that term a lot, but don't try to inundate yourself with every financial lesson there is when you're, let's say, when you're 22. When you're 22, there are certain life stage financial items that you want to learn. You want to learn how to pay your bills, how to maybe build credit without letting credit get out of control. You want to learn about compounding as a tool in your life. And, maybe if you're getting your first job, you want to understand what a 401k is or what an IRA is. It might not be your top priority because you're not all necessarily completely thinking about retirement at that point, but it might be something you want to learn a little bit about. But you're easing into it. You don't need to learn about loan to value ratios on a home equity line of credit, right? I mean, that's too much for where you are in your life. But then you progress through your life, you can start to acquire more knowledge. So this being bad with money, I think starts with people not understanding, even just people who potentially their credit cards get out of control. Well, do they really understand how minimum payments work? Do they really understand what's my current balance versus my statement balance versus, again, I have Gen Zs in my household and I did a whole tutorial on let's pull up the credit card statement. Let's talk about what all this means. Gosh, if you don't pay that minimum payment, this is what it's going to mean for your credit. And I mean, unfortunately, we lack that type of education. I mean, I used to teach a personal finance class in college, but I think that's pretty rare that that's required for people to take. It was where I taught, which I thought was a great thing. Anyway, so I feel like I'm bad with money is a narrative we start because we don't understand. That's just my point of view. I mean, potentially, again, I'm bad with money could be because I spent based on social media or because of other things, but I think
Mhm.
education can help a lot.
In that same vein, I also feel like it can be helpful to think about like what is most pressing for you right now. Like we just talked to a guest who talked about how her entryway into personal finance was the fact that she was making $16,000 a year and half her check was going to student loan payments. And she was like, I need to get these student loans gone. Like it is my most pressing issue. And then as once she paid off her student loan, she was like, okay, like now I guess I need to learn something else about personal finance to figure out, like, do I save this money? Do I do something else? And I liked that story because I think even if your thing is I'm overspending because everything I see on Instagram or TikTok, I just want to buy. It's like, okay, you have that knowledge about yourself. Now, how can you work with that to like get to where you want to be? So kind of taking that internal approach of being like, what is my most pressing thing right now? Like why do I think I'm bad with money? What's the one overarching thing? And then focusing on that first.
No, that's great. I think that personal reflection and giving feedback to yourself is fantastic.
Yeah, and just being curious too, I think. Like
Hmm.
thinking that money is something that matters in my life. So like I
Hmm.
can be curious about it and I can learn about it. I think for me that was kind of how I got personally interested in money. It was just like following my own curiosity. Like
Yeah. And I love that you are role models, both of you, for women in learning about money because I do feel, I mean, there's all these studies where they talk about women, feel like in order to know something, they feel like they have to know it 100% versus men say like, oh, well, I can learn how to do that. And so that when you said curious, like just having that mindset, but then also having the confidence to know like, gosh, if I study that or if I invest in educating myself about that, I can learn about that. And so the demystification with a podcast like this or anything else that women are doing to help other women and just people of this generation of your generation are doing in general, but I think it's really important. Like it is not something that is exclusive to people who have offices on Wall Street. Like
Mm.
it is something that anyone can learn, you know, but it doesn't always feel like that. It feels intimidating sometimes.
One of your tools is helping people align spending with their values. Can you walk us through what that looks like in practice?
Well, I think the example that I gave about my house and, looking at in that decision, like I had something that was weighing me down and making me feel stressed or making us feel stressed. But my values were I wanted to expose my kids who were, I think elementary school at the time. I wanted to start exposing them to travel and I wanted to be able to make decisions about where they were in school, if I needed to give them help or I needed to do those. Those were my parents had helped me when I was growing up. They paid, as I mentioned, they paid for my college. And so for me personally, that was a value. I wanted to be able to have money for that as well. So I think it's when I talk about it or when I write about it, it's literally going back to like what is important in your life, what's important to you. So if you have a family, if you don't have a family, that was probably going to influence you a great deal about, kind of where you want to spend your money or where you value. What kind of life do you want to have for yourself? This sort of mini retirement concept is do you want to be able to do that? And it's trade-offs. I mean, I do say a lot in my life in general, like it's a matter of choices. And sometimes you have to get in touch with what's important to you. And then if you make a choice that's aligned with what's important with you, you might be giving up something that you've deemed as less important. But I guess that's part of the choice. So I think your values change too over time, right? I mean, this is a lifelong journey of like getting in touch with your values. So it's not like, oh, when you're 21, you decided what your values were and that's it. You can't change. So that means, whatever it means. Like as we get older, we get exposed to more and we make pivots and changes. So I think it's something that sounds really hard because, it's like, oh, I'm going to do values based budgeting or, make values based decisions in my life. And it's probably one of those terms that gets a little bit more hype than really what it is. It's just getting in touch
Mm,
with what's important to you.
One thing Emily and I have talked about is that one of our values is finding our community, and we live
Hmm.
in different states. I'm in Minnesota, she's in Michigan. But because that is a value of each of ours individually, we have allowed ourselves to, like, Emily will sign up for a quilting class and like
Hmm.
pay for a quilting class, or we've both allowed ourselves to buy, like, gym memberships, like, Emily has a yoga
Hmm.
membership, and I was doing bar for a while, because it allows you to be around other people and potentially make friendships and just feel more grounded in your community, and so, for sure, there was a past version of me that would be like, "I'm never gonna pay for a gym membership
Hmm.
of any kind, like, I can get outside and work for free or look up YouTube videos," but now I'm like, "No, like, there is the health benefit, sure, but also just the benefit of getting out the house, especially when you work from home, and being around people and having conversations, like, that matters maybe even more."
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I think one of the biggest kind of values-based decisions that I made as I left corporate America when my kids were young. And
Mm,
it was not the best financial decision for me. And it took me a long time to get back into a role that felt like where I left off, could go back to where
mhm,
I left off. And I did a lot of things in the meantime, a lot of very entrepreneurial things. And like I mentioned, I did a lot of freelance work. But I also did a lot of volunteer work in my community, at my kids'
mm,
schools. God, I was a Girl Scout leader. I don't know if I want to put that on a podcast, right? Yeah, but I love the Girl Scouts, but that just never was something I thought I would do. But choices that I made to earn less money, to be more present, when my kids were at a specific age. And then by the same token, it's not like my values changed in terms of my kids, but my like life situation changed and it just made sense for me to transition out of that again too. But I completely agree. I think they're all very individual. I love the examples that you guys gave.
Do you think the definition of wealth is changing, like, generation to generation? And how does wealth relate to financial wellness?
So the first part of the question was, is the definition of wealth changing? And I think the perception of wealth is
Mm.
changing. So, in this, I'll go back to, we did this research and in the mind money connection survey that we did. And I know previously I was quoting like millennial only, but this is kind of more broadly like everyone who took the survey. So we asked people, do you think you're rich? And let's say like 20% about said, yeah, I think I'm rich. And this was a survey where it was 4,000 people ages, I believe it was like 25 to 55, somewhere in that range. And then they all made over $100,000. So about 20% said, yeah, I think I'm rich. And then we asked them, do you think like, do other people think you're rich? And it was funny because then over 32% of people said, yeah, other people think I'm rich. So it's funny, like how we perceive wealth versus the outside world. And so wealth is that sort of indicated to us. And interestingly, and I don't have those numbers right off the top of my head, but when we talked to people, because we were able to do like tranches with income levels, like people, making over $300,000 a year, which that's pretty darn good. Um,
Mhm.
they still didn't, in large percentages, think that they were rich, even though they knew that other people thought they were. So I think in some senses, wealth is a perception. Wealth can be a perception based on like who you surround yourself with. It can be a perception of like even just where you live on the country. Like, people if in Southern California where I live, if other people in other parts of the country know how much homes cost, like they fall over, right? But it just becomes monopoly money for us because it's
Mhm.
what are you going to do? You still have to live in the house. You can't really get the money out of it. But so I think to some extent the perceptions of wealth have changed, and I think that social media help that. But I also think that wealth has changed and financial wellness is changing. We talk about something called living a richer life. Like I think that younger generations perceive wealth and freedom more connected. So then that idea of financial freedom, the more freedom I have with my money, more freedom I have in my life, the wealthier I am. So it's not necessarily a number. It's like what I gain from my money or what my money allows me to do. I mean, it's similar to what I was talking about I wasn't wealthy at 22, but like managing my own money, having my own money gives me a certain sense of freedom. So I think I guess those would be my two comments about the definition of wealth and the connection to financial wellness. I think financial wellness is whatever allows you to live the life that gives you security and confidence and comfort. So I think financial wellness is a little bit in the eye of the beholder, depending on what back to what your goals are. If you want to travel the world and live on a beach, in a really fancy place, then financial wellness, might require a lot more dollars in the bank than if you want to live a much simpler life.
I was going to say not to throw out yet another Morgan Housel quote, but the other one that I have written down is having more control over your time and options is becoming one of the most valuable currencies in the world.
Agree.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that freedom. It's a broader definition of freedom too.
Yeah.
And I think Gen Z and younger millennials too, like they talk about that a lot. I mean, that's where sort of that mini retirement comes from, the idea of wanting more flexibility. I mean, again, I have Gen Zs in my household, and when I'm working late or doing something, one of my daughters is usually like, Mom, why are you doing that? Why are you working so much? Why are you doing this? Sort of a different mentality around, to me, that's normal. That's what you do. And
Mm.
I think we're all going to be better off when Gen Z takes over the world, if that's which I love that. I can't
Yeah.
wait till you're in charge if that's what you think.
I know, that's such a good mindset to have. And back to Emily's point, I kind of think that's why we do feel that tug of war because we're not quite Gen Z, but like we see and we're like, I like what they're saying. Like I want that for myself. And then also we have all of our parents messaging of being like, You gotta work at least 40 hours a week and you gotta grind, grind, grind.
Yeah.
I have this recurring conversation with my mom, who I love, who she'll, like, ask me how work's going, and I'm like, no one else in my family is, like, a freelancer, like, I'm unique in that and how I work, and so she'll ask how work's going, and sometimes I'll be like, "Ugh, I've just been so busy lately." Like, to me, it's like, "Ugh," and she's like, "Oh, that's wonderful, great news. Being busy is good." I'm like, "Yeah, mom, it is good," but at the same time, I don't want, like I don't wanna be working all the time, like, you
Mhm.
know, that's not what I want for myself. That's not why
Yeah.
I decided to freelance, but
Before we hopped on this call, Emily was talking about how she doesn't have as much client work to do this week, and she was like, "This is how I'm meant to live."
Yeah. I know. I loved freelancing. I freelanced for a few, well, I freelanced for a while actually. And I know it's so hard because I enjoyed the variety of work. The rainmaking, as they say, like the going after the work sometimes is
Mhm.
exhausting. And then the anxiety of like, you are so torn because it's so nice when you don't have it, but then when you don't get when the money's not flowing in, it's its own kind of stress for
Yeah.
sure.
It's a
It is a roller
balance.
coaster.
Yeah. But you get to make it what you want.
Okay. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about how our culture talks about money, what would it be?
I think I would go back to the idea that knowing about money or knowledge about money is something that's reserved for only like certain people or certain types of people, and that I wish that I mean, our culture talks about money as if it's like those people have it, know how to use it, whatever, versus I think that everyone could learn about money. I think, again, you have to have the curiosity, as you said earlier, Emily. And obviously, it takes some discipline if you have to teach yourself and you didn't learn in school. But I wish that we could all believe that we could be money smart and
Yeah.
feel good about that.
Julie, this has been so fun and helpful, I'm sure, for our listeners.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this conversation, giving us like a new way to think about financial wellness. If any of our listeners want to learn more, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me personally on on LinkedIn as Julie Guntrip. They can find Genius Bank at geniusbank.com. And in the learn section of our navigation, you can do drop down, you can go to our blog. My team, writes the articles. I read and edit every single one of them. So I feel very passionate about them and the value that they bring to people. And also I talked about this mind money connection research we did. That's also there on our website,
Mm.
geniusbank.com. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask everyone to go follow us on Instagram at Genius Bank because we have so many exciting things coming up. And we do a lot of great, one of the, I mean, the main things we talk about is financial wellness on our Instagram account. And we have a lot of really fun things coming up, including a really cool pickleball sponsorship that we've got going on and other cool
Oh,
stuff. So those are my plugs.
Awesome. Yeah, we will have all of that in the show notes. So you can follow Julie and Genius Bank on all the things. But, girlies, if this episode resonated with you, if you have ever felt like you're bad with money or that everyone else has it all figured out and you're the only one who doesn't, please know that you are not alone. The numbers don't tell the whole story, and you're allowed to rewrite the narrative.
we'll be back next week with a new episode. See you then.
And thanks again, Julie. This was really great.
Thanks. Oh my gosh, so much fun. What are we going to talk about next week? Let's go.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Finance Girlies podcast. Nothing in this episode is meant to be taken as financial advice.
Please do your own research and talk to a professional if you need advice. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Love you. Bye.